Welcome to the Start Grind. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Gene Case.
Wow.
All right.
That's great.
Awesome. Thank you for making it out here. I mean, this is actually one of the few interviews I actually look really forward to. So thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So we always like to start our fireside chat on sort of a personal note. So if you can sort of talk about where you're raised, where you're born, perhaps what your parents did, and talk about maybe your first philanthropic activity you did with them. So let's start with you.
Well, first of all, we were talking backstage before we came out and said anybody that's here tonight is a hero because believe me, at about, 3 o'clock this afternoon, we were thinking no one was going to be here with the tornadoes and the downpour and everything else. So thanks for being out here. So, you know, it's interesting. I was born in a place called Normal, Illinois. Really, and we tease that I've been trying to get back to normal ever since. I had a cornfield in my backyard, and so it wasn't really a setting in some ways where, you know, that was aspirational, very small town. But it was really, you know, I lived there until I was 11, and then my family moved to South Florida. I was raised by a single mom, and she played a really central role, I think, in my life and a lot of things that have turned out. And of course, I think I realized that more and more as life goes by. She raised 4 kids alone. And we're often asked this question of, you know, oh, well, what took you into philanthropy? Well, of course, philanthropy was always a part of my life, and partly because I benefited from the philanthropy of others. Being raised by a single mom, I had the benefit of going to a private school on a full scholarship. So that was a very early experience of benefiting myself from the generosity of others. And I think when I think back on sort of, you know, when did philanthropy sort of, you know, hit you? We also, of course, were raised, I think, with the idea that, you know, to whom much is given, much is really expected. And I think that's just a value that both my husband and I were raised with, independent of our different economic circumstances.
Nice, okay. So, hashtag StartGrind at Gene Case. Okay, great. So I wanted to sort of go, before we go into the whole Case Foundation, I wanted to sort of talk more about the background while you were at AOL,
Sure.
GE, The Source,
Yeah.
which is probably the first internet company out there.
That's right.
You know, you had a very strong marketing background, and so like my question would be like, you know, how important is it to have like marketing, because you can speak to that, for, you know, with startups or even for nonprofit? Like, how important is that? So
Can I ask the audience, for those of you that are here tonight, who's from sort of a social enterprise, a for-profit social enterprise? Can I see a raise of hands? How many of you are from nonprofits? Okay. And then how many of you are just from straight startups? Okay. Wow, we've got a great mix here. So I think marketing is important no matter what sector you live in. And at the Case Foundation, we spend a lot of time actually in what we call cross-sector work, engaging all the sectors. But particularly when I talk to nonprofit audiences, but the same is true of social enterprises, I think, we talk about the importance of, you know, some of the principles and almost some of the language, if you will, that we're used to more on the business side that sometimes is missing in a nonprofit frame, or let's just say in mission-oriented work. And when I got started at the foundation, I had spent my entire career marketing in the tech field. And so, you know, I came into the philanthropic field, started working with nonprofits, and it became clear to me that the sector actually considered marketing almost a bad word, like it's a little tacky to talk about, you know, marketing-driven kind of concepts. But when you think about it, marketing and sort of general business model / business principles, there's kind of a confluence of things. In marketing, we have to be really aware of what's our unique value proposition. And no matter what organization you're running or working for, if you don't have that nailed, you're probably not going to be successful. And I want to put an underscore on the word unique. Because often in mission-oriented work, If you're sort of mission focused, you can sort of ride on that, but that's actually not enough. You have to have a unique value proposition. And we at the Case Foundation challenge ourselves on this. What is our unique value proposition in the world that we're trying to add value to as well? And I think that's just a marketing concept that everybody gets if you're on the business side, and sometimes they don't challenge themselves on the more mission-focused side. Understanding, revenue models. One of the things that made AOL very successful, we were very data-driven so that we understood the cost per acquisition of a new member and the cost to retain a customer as well. We knew the lifetime revenue, and we constantly worked for recurring revenue. But when you go into mission-oriented work, sometimes they don't talk about revenue. Sometimes they don't talk about customers, even though no matter what you're doing, you have both customers and revenue. So it's just kind of interesting because I think the marketing principles help drive a very disciplined business model, and that business model can illuminate a path to success.
That's interesting. So you're talking about metrics.
Yeah.
And when I think about metrics, I mean, that's sort of like what runs startups, right? You have to have key metrics. Now, so what are sort of the key metrics that you see? I mean, we'll get right into the Case Foundation. What are sort of the main metrics you keep track of for some of the grants that you would give to nonprofits?
Sure. Well, when we do grants, we're typically at the start of a relationship. We have an MOU, which is a Memorandum of Understanding. And there we kind of say, okay, here's what I'm investing in, and here's how I'm going to look at a return on investment for the money I'm giving to you or the things that I'm investing in. And then we meet routinely with those that we invest in to see how we're doing along that set of expectations on what I'll call ROI. And we've had a lot of really interesting experiences along that path. We've had many go entirely off the reservation, right? In which case, chances are if they're off the reservation and they're not either measuring along the way or, course correcting, they're probably not going to continue to be a grantee of ours. We've had others that I think are some of the best examples, and startups should really be able to relate to this. I haven't worked with many startups where, the breakout business model looks exactly like the business plan that they got started with. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur here, you know that sometimes it takes a couple of turns. Your first idea might have been sort of in the right area, but you had to tweak and pivot and turn along the way. And it turns out actually mission work is the same way in nonprofits. But what happens is if they sell a promise sometimes to philanthropy, they feel like they can't move from that drive that they're on, that they promised that they would do X, and even if X isn't really necessarily turning into impact, they feel like they can't go back to the donor and say, well, what about this? So the difference that we've tried to make with our grantees is to give them that permission and almost encouragement to experiment, keep working the model, make sure you're staying innovative and looking for the best, most efficient ways forward and the fastest paths. And sometimes that isn't the same kind of thing that you start out with as kind of a donor-grantee relationship, or like with startups, an investee and an investor relationship.
It's very like lean startup approach.
Absolutely,
for
yeah, right.
So I really love the whole Case Foundation mission. So let me just quote it. So for both, this is sort of like the mission statement, just according to Wikipedia, for the Case Foundation Revolution. We invest in people and ideas that can change the world, and it's amazing. I love that statement. But I just wanted to sort of just rewind that back, like
sure.
When you started the Case Foundation, was there sort of like an aha moment when you had started the foundation? Did it just like hit you, or was it something that was just kind of gradual?
Yeah, so in my role as Chief of Marketing at AOL, we started the AOL Foundation when I was still there, and that was my role basically to stand it up and get it going. And I think I've often referred to that as our toe in the water around philanthropy. And I learned a lot of things, but one of the things that I learned is there's no better time to be engaged in trying to change the world or be of help to an organization or a cause than when you're most active and maybe at the most important point in your career. You can bring a network, you can bring real world knowledge, you can keep them current and help them understand trends that are going on, et cetera. And I always wondered, why did it develop in America that you make all your money, you finish out your career, and then you start with philanthropy, because you're really under-leveraged if you go in that way. The highest leverage point you have is going to be when you're most active in your career life. And by the way, we would say, not because this is what we think, but this is what our grantees tell us, that often the greatest value we add is not the checks we write. It's actually, you know, some of the almost pro bono strategic work that we'll do with them to help them figure out market opportunities, to help them refine their business models, to introduce them to our network of folks that we know. And I think, you know, at any point in your career, you're available to do that, either for a cause you care about or in your own organization, attracting people who are at the prime of their careers into helping you build that business.
I mean, that's a good segue to impact investing, but I just actually wanted to talk about, even before that, I know that you and Steve have been talking about this whole Fearless campaign.
Right.
And so what really is really intriguing to me is, like, you know, why did you use the word fearless? I mean, there's other words you could have used, right? There's, you know, in the Star Wars, it could have been passion, focus, relentless,
right,
you know, tenacious, you know, grit.
right.
So why fearless? Why
By the way,
word?
we love all those words.
Oh, you did?
So
Okay.
I think those are all good words, too.
Sure.
So what Brian's talking about is, at the 15th anniversary of the Case Foundation, we introduced a campaign called Be Fearless. But how it came about was actually quite thoughtful. And that was, we started out knowing our 15th anniversary was coming, using it as a moment. And by the way, no matter what organization you're running, I think it's really healthy at certain life cycle times to go through this process, to stop, to look around, and to ask the big questions about, you know, where have we been effective in our work? What's happened in the landscape or the ecosystem we're working within? Have we seen change or impact or just success in places that we wanted? So we were asking all those big questions. And we really decided to really pull back the lens and not just look at our own work, talk to our partners, look back over time. And we got really jazzed by the idea that in some cases, we live in a world where we're trying to make big change in really hard, sort of daunting challenges. And in most cases where people set out to do that, we haven't been successful. If you think about it, many of the same old challenges are dogging us today, as have been dogging us for decades, if not hundreds of years. But there are bright spots. So we said, heck, what's up with those bright spots, and how do we learn from that? So we hired a firm, and they went to school on the idea of what is behind transformational change, where there's breakthrough change. And they came up with a couple of principles that were always present. And one of them begins with make big bets and make history, swing for the fences kind of ideas. The second principle was about taking risks, and we say experiment early and often. The third principle is make failure matter. Except that if you're trying to innovate, you're taking risks. And when you're taking risks, failure might be an option. And if you fail fast, fail forward, learn from it, move on, and try and apply those principles. So those were just some of the principles. There were more, and I won't go into great detail on all of them. But basically what happened is, when we stepped back, the firm we were using said, we really think this can all be encompassed under the theme of Be Fearless. And so as we looked at a sector that we live in, both philanthropy and nonprofits, it's not a very risk-tolerant environment. If you're here and you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a social enterprise, whether you're just straight-up startup, you know, you're an entrepreneur, you're used to risk. Chances are you wear some of your failures as a badge, because you know that those failures are going to help you be successful with whatever you're taking forward now. But in the nonprofit, in the public sector, and in philanthropy, failure was just not something that was talked about. And so I think it really, we felt a need to have these conversations in our sectors to point out that we desperately need innovation to change the world in all the areas that we care about. And if we're going to innovate, we have to start acknowledging that failure could be an option. So that's what's behind the Be Fearless campaign. And part of it is talking and sort of doing trainings, if you will, with lots of audiences and organizations that we sit with, We have some tools online, and just this month we've launched a new toolkit for organizations where they can go in, see case studies, understand how you might start to make your organization a little bit more fearless. We've had 25,000 people take the Be Fearless pledge, most of those organizations. So it's kind of a real, almost evangelistic movement that we.
Got it. No, the Be Fearless is like almost like very visceral. It's like, it just,
Yeah.
I mean, too bad in the startup world we're sort of confronted with words like sleepless and moneyless. So, I want to talk about impact investing. So, this is sort of like a term that gets thrown around a lot. And so, I wanted to sort of like ask, like, what do you think? What is impact investing? What is your definition of impact investing? And why is it important to grow this space?
Sure. So it is a term that is sort of all-encompassing of some different things. But generally, when we're talking about impact investing, we're talking about organizations that provide both a financial and a social return. And so if you look at the list of companies that are engaged here at 1776, and I don't know if Evan is still in the room, but Evan Burfield and Donna Harris had the vision for this, and this is the second time I've been able to come here and be on this stage. It is truly an awesome place, so inspirational. But a lot of the organizations here are out to address some of those dogged challenges that I referred to just a few minutes ago. And the concept of impact investing, on one hand, blends what I call a perfect storm. A new generation of investors who are emerging who want more than just a financial return. And largely, this is being driven off of the new generation, either dogging their parents or their grandparents, or as investors themselves, or people within organizations. And the way they look at it is they say, why would you be satisfied with just a financial return? Why wouldn't you use your money to get a financial return and change the world in the process? So that's sort of the investor side that I think is emerging. And if you talk to the big banks today and their private wealth consulting that they do, they'll tell you this new generation is really affecting the parents and the grandparents who are investing the money to influence them to spend it in ways that can benefit society more broadly. Now move over here. A new class of entrepreneurs have emerged. And these are entrepreneurs who say, I don't want to just build a great company, man. I want to change the world. And if you walk around here at 1776, you'll find people working on transportation. You'll find them working on energy, on education, on things that really matter to us. And I know there's another incubator in town, Halcyon, and we have some folks from Halcyon. I don't know where you are, but hi. And they're doing some really cool things. I was just over there like 10 days ago. A similar spirit, like really focused on dogged challenges, but building great companies to do that. And I think the importance of that is, Brian, remember I said, if you really, like if we were doing this as a team together and we had a whiteboard up here and we put the big challenges and then we would track progress, I think we'd be disappointed by the progress. But if we also said, well, who's been working on it? Too often we've left business and the entrepreneurial spirit on the sidelines. We've left it to the job of nonprofits and the public sector. And God bless them, they're doing good things. But boy, could they use the infusion of the innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit and some of the disciplines that business can bring. And so I think we see great promise with this new class of entrepreneurs and this new class of investors to really infuse the private sector into the business of changing the world, unlike we've ever had it before.
I wanted to talk more, dig deeper into when you say the new class of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And one of the keystones, and I guess the demographics that the Case Foundation, from what I read, is the Millennials.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you. So I looked it up because I'm too old to, I guess, be a millennial. But millennials, they're between ages of 18 to 33. Do you think that the millennials could become the next golden age cohort, so to speak? And
yeah,
I'll let you. I have some statistics here, but I'll let you.
I'm
talk
pretty
about
bullish on the new generation, and we're starting to look at Gen Z now too, because they're starting to come of age in meaningful ways. The reason we're so deeply engaged in work with millennials at the Case Foundation, remember I talked about marketing. Well, if you ask the big companies that found great success in consumer products, it's because they're paying attention to their future markets while they're also serving their current markets. They understand, and when you think about where the premium ad dollars have always gone, they've gone into ages similar to what the millennials are today. So I think if we want to see a future, we need to engage the next generation. But I think for me and for my husband and for our team at the Case Foundation, and particularly for my husband and I, this is really personal because we were really young when we started a great company. And we were disruptors, and we were the agitators, and we sat in rooms with people who didn't want to think differently and didn't want to necessarily entertain new ideas about how you address different things, either through products or services or in new markets. And we saw the great benefit of being young. So I think we're super bullish on calling on young people to come play a role in helping to change the world. You're very idealistic when you're young. You haven't yet really been sort of batted down by all of life's realities or whatever. So they really represent a unique opportunity to drive innovation and new ways of thinking about changing the world.
I want to switch gears a little bit here. I want to talk a little bit more about the Case Foundation. What is your favorite project or charitable organization that? I know that's a difficult question to ask.
Who's your favorite kid? Okay.
What's the most interesting?
Yeah, I would probably go to what's the most interesting, and not surprisingly, some people call me Miss Failure, but I'll go to one where it wasn't necessarily a breakout success, but maybe it taught us a lot about what we needed to know in the world that we're trying to bring change to. And that's in the area of clean water. So we launched a very large initiative focused on clean water in Sub-Saharan Africa, in 10 Sub-Saharan African countries. We launched it in a very high-profile way, together with President Clinton and Laura Bush when she was the First Lady, on stage in New York, with a lot of sort of fanfare and promise. So maybe that's sort of lesson number one about be careful before you launch. But we really did believe in the promise of it, and we had partners on the ground in South Africa. But things really sort of right from the get-go proved to be much more challenging than we expected them to be. We had an intervention that was a children's playground. And as the children played on it, they pumped clean water up from the ground. Think of it like a windmill, if you will, turned on the ground. So in so many ways, it was just brilliant. Kids could play, clean water would be delivered, et cetera. But lots of problems started getting in the way. We had some partner issues. We realized doing business 8,000 miles away is kind of challenging too, and I think we hadn't set up appropriately for that in the beginning. So what happened is it became clear, it's like, this isn't exactly going. So we had those hard conversations, et cetera. And there really came a point at which we'd spent about a year trying to course correct. And we got behind closed doors as a team, and we said, all right, what are we going to do? This is not working. We either have to come clean, or we have to, basically shove it under the rug and figure out some kind of exit strategy. And I think that was a really important moment for us as an organization, because we made a commitment that we were going to tell the world what wasn't working. And I wrote a blog called The Painful Acknowledgement of Coming Up Short. And I talked about where we didn't get it so right, but our commitment to stay with it and see if we could find a path forward to stay in clean water. Well, what happened was almost overnight, I got this major reaction from my peers and from people, in philanthropy and in nonprofits saying, thank you for, acknowledging that something didn't work. Well, anyway, we pivoted. We found some new partners. We're doing work globally today with an organization called Water for People. We learned that it takes a lot more than just one intervention to actually be a solution in a community. You need a variety of interventions, and every community is different. You need the community to really be in the lead for what they want, and basically providing their own solutions when things go wrong. So we learned a lot of lessons, and at the time, can you imagine, I remember when I had to hit the button behind that blog that I was writing, and I didn't want to push that button, but it was just, we could have beat ourselves up, but we agreed we'd come out in front. And I look back, and I wouldn't trade that. And of course, the other thing clean water and our work in it taught us, and for those of you that are involved in global development, you probably know this, but clean water is at the intersection of so many things. Girls typically go get and deliver the water. And they can walk up to 5 miles. They can be carrying buckets up to 40 pounds, okay, to deliver the water. If they're going to get the water, they're not in school. If their moms are going to get the water, they're not working or they're not providing adequate care for their children. When young girls go miles from the house alone or even with another young girl, they risk being raped, the spread of HIV. I mean, what we call sort of like comorbidity issues, things that were also affected just by the fact that there wasn't delivery of clean water, was stunning to us. So it was one of those potential home run situations. If you could fix the water problem, you could keep kids in school. They wouldn't drink dirty water and die from it, which is the #1, cause of death among young children in Africa. So it was a whole myriad of things you could fix simply by delivering clean water. And I think we just learned a lot by dealing in that arena.
No, I like that. I mean, speaking about the failures of it, speaking of failures, would you ever fund charitable organizations that help failed startups?
I think we've done that, actually. I think it was called Startup America and is now called Up Global. We love that work.
One of your biggest, I guess, tangible successes, from the Case Foundation has been investment in micro-giving platform. Right. And so, such as Network for Good,
right.
Causes, and Mission Fish, I think that's the eBay platform. Why is that? Why do you think that these micro-giving platforms do better? Is it because of better accountability or managing them? Or what's sort of... Why has that been successful?
Can I go back to the last question you asked
Sure.
me?
Okay, go ahead.
So Brian, I know, is teasing from Startup Grind, but Startup Grind has been a really important partner with us in our work around startups, and so we consider you a partner. Sure. Just want to make sure you know that. Okay, the giving platforms. So this was really cool. I mean, at the Case Foundation, we try to look for big transformational opportunities, and we're catalyst investors, so we'll go early, right? And we'll take all the arrows in our back to kind of do proof of concept or help support organizations where there isn't necessarily data yet to say this is going to work. We're really comfortable in that place. So with giving platforms, I think we forget, that even 10 years ago, this idea that you always had a mobile device with you, you were always connected, it wasn't the case. When we started AOL, only 3% of people were online, and they were online 1 hour a week. So we always believed in the potential for online to become a platform to let people engage with causes that they cared about. So actually, Network for Good, which is the leading sort of giving platform that exists, was spun out of an effort that we started at AOL. And today, Network for Good, all by itself, has resulted in over $1 billion of micro donations to causes people care about. The average gift is around $20 or $25. But there were 2 other platforms that we invested in as well. And these forms of investments ranged from grants to equity investments in companies to some hybrid tools that we used on the financial front. And together, the 3 have resulted in over $1.5 billion in micro-giving. So we're really excited by the potential, but I would never look at the value of what was created there by the $1.5 billion, but rather the super exciting opportunity to make known these great organizations and causes and charities all over the nation and all over the world, and to connect in a very meaningful way the people who care about a cause and new causes that they can support. I mean, I think that's really the thing that jazzes us most.
Cool. Actually, I wanted to talk about perhaps maybe the type of companies charitable organization you invest in. So there seems to be a uprise of sort of this B Corp startup. And so Warby Parker is a good example of that. And Tom's and Method. Right. My wife loves Method, by the way.
Method's a great company. We should talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. So would you ever, invest in, these are companies with that have mission.
We do, and we have.
Oh, you have? Okay, let's talk about that. Okay, sure.
So we've always been kind of impact-minded in the companies that we invest in, and we've invested in a variety of them. And one of them I'll talk about, BrainScope, and then I do want to come back to Method just for a different reason. BrainScope is a local company in Bethesda, and I don't know if you've heard about it or not, but essentially it created a mobile device using LEDs and using brainwaves, EEG. So, Brian, if you were an athlete or you were a soldier, before you go onto the battlefield or the field of play, we would baseline you with this handheld device using a mobile phone, okay, to basically say, okay, here's your normal brain wave. Then if you have a traumatic brain injury or a concussion, we can tell that something's changed, and we can say, okay, you need to go get a CT scan or you don't. So it aids in the diagnosis of traumatic brain injury and concussion. And the military has invested quite a bit in this company because, as you know, this has been a TBI war that our soldiers have been fighting, an unprecedented number of traumatic brain injuries. And its application to sports, we had 5 kids, they all played sports, they all had concussions. We couldn't believe if, and many of you probably have kids too who experience the same thing. You know, if you're hit on the field of play and we think you might have a concussion, they're going to take you over. And they're going to mostly give you the same protocol you would have received 50 years ago. 50 years ago, if you had a concussion. How many fingers am I holding up? Where are you? And you go, really? That's the best we can do today? So this new company, BrainScope, has taken technology and the use of algorithms and brainwaves to basically provide what I would call sort of a modern-day solution to helping to identify and diagnose.
They're not a B Corp though. That's a regular.
They're not technically a B Corp.
So you're you're on the board of directors.
I am a BrainScope, yeah.
BrainScope, okay.
A B Corp that Revolution has invested in and just made a $30 million investment. But interestingly, Revolution does not have an impact investing fund per se. And I want to make that point carefully because they just made a $30 million investment in a B Corp called Revolution Foods. We've been watching this company for a really long time. This company was started by 2 moms who looked around at the school system and said, hey, we can do better. We can deliver healthy food to our children, and they started a company to do just that. They're on track to be a $100 million revenue company. As I said, they just got this new investment. But the cool thing about it is, because Revolution doesn't have an impact investing fund per se, Revolution Foods won that fair and square against not just B Corps, but all ventures that they could have chosen to invest in. And so although there are certain impact funds that will just do B Corps, one of the things that excites us is many of these B Corps are winning the day against just a straight startup who isn't necessarily trying to deliver a mission at the same time.
So actually, that's a good segue for the topic about double bottom line.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's sort of a rage. I mean, Warby Parker. I had interviewed Dave Gilboa, and you know, they have an amazing line of sunglasses or of eyewear. But I thought it was kind of interesting where he said that his startup, once they start doing the buy a pair, give a pair, it's sort of that whole double bottom line. That's when they sort of started taking off. So, like, do you think that startups and Fortune 500 companies should have a double bottom line strategy?
Yeah,
you know,
I do.
What's your opinion about that?
So I want to just go back to B Corps for a minute. You know, there are about 1,000 certified B Corps, and if you don't know what B Corps is, there are just certain states that have passed laws that recognize these companies are a different class. They're trying to achieve a set of sort of social outcomes at the same time they're trying to provide a financial return. And so investors know that when they invest in the company. In Warby Parker's case, I think for any entrepreneur sitting out there, you know, what Warby Parker really did was they said, we have to be best in class at what we're here to do. So we have to have the coolest, fastest, most interesting ways for consumers to buy our products. And in this case, it's eyeglasses if you don't know their model. And they said, look, we do care about changing the world and delivering glasses to the underserved, but we're never going to be great at that if we're not first great as a best-in-class company in eyewear. And of course, they've zoomed to the top of the charts, and particularly the next generation really loves Warby Parker. And so what's happened, because they're great at their core business, right? Now they can scale this mission business in unprecedented ways, and that's what we're seeing. And so in my mind, you know, with social entrepreneurs, sometimes they can get the mission out a little bit in front of what they're really there to do with their products and services. And I'm not sure that's the best approach. I think being unabashed and chasing your market and being the best in class in what you're there to do is the fastest and best way to then deliver a mission too. And the mission doesn't have to be a one-for-one like Tom's or Warby. You know, in the case of Method, for those of you that don't know Method, they just have sustainable cleaning products, right? And that doesn't sound like much. much. But guess what happened yesterday? Just yesterday. Procter & Gamble announced that they're going to change their formulation for Tide so that they can have a product that's sustainable too, both in terms of not harming the environment with the chemicals that's in it and in the packaging that can be sort of recycled and reused. So when you start seeing a young company come on the scene and change a big old company like Procter & Gamble, that is super cool. So, I think that we can't really measure the value of these companies just in the products and the consumers, but how they're changing the world more broadly with those around them.
We actually had the Method founders go to the Startup Grind conference last year.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, he showed up in a jumpsuit suit, like it was like
oh,
looked like
cool.
it was an astronaut.
Right. Yeah.
And it was you guys should check it out. There's a video on the Startup Grind podcast, but they're very funny guys. Hashtag Startup Grind at Gene Case. Let's I know I have to make that plug.
No, that's good.
Please tweet out,
guys.
guys.
Turn your
Please
phones
tweet
on and
out.
tweet. Yeah.
Because Steve is watching. So let's talk about Up Global and the Case Foundation, because Up Global is definitely something that's everybody knows Up Global.
Right.
Let's sort of like rewind back. Like, how did obviously Up Global is Startup Weekend plus
right.
Startup America partnership.
Uh-huh.
So let's talk about that story with Startup America
Sure.
partnership. How did that form? What was the reasoning behind that when you did that initiative?
Sure.
And what were you trying to solve with that?
Sure. Well, if we can take you back a few years, we're a nation coming out of a financial crisis, and the economies in our communities were really struggling. And sitting with the philanthropic lens on it, I've often said there's no amount of philanthropy that can make up for missing jobs. So I think there was a lot of conversation in the philanthropic arena, as well as with the administration at the time, around what solutions we could be bringing to our communities. And Kauffman Foundation had been tracking the impact of startups in communities and in the economy and the jobs. And they had noted that in the last 25 to 30 years, all net new jobs in America came from startup companies, new companies, not big established. And you might say, well, wait, the big established have all the numbers. That's true, but they expand and contract. Whereas a startup starts with one, right, and grows from there. And so we had learned in our work in the developing world that, gosh, if you could get some new companies going, that could really create a thriving environment in the communities where they existed. So it was almost like the idea of taking what we had known in the developing world to be sort of a secret sauce to help communities be strengthened and thrive, and bring it home. And so at the White House, together with the Kauffman Foundation, the Case Foundation joined in the launch of something called Startup America. And the idea of it really was to support and to grow the startup eco-culture in America and to bring startups some of the resources that they need. But the real play behind it was a play to strengthen our economy by bringing more jobs to communities around the nation. And I think we feel really good based on the work you guys are doing and so many organizations really trying to bring resources to and help sort of prop up startups.
So let's how can a startup here get plugged into Up Global? Let's
Sure. So I should point out that we started as Startup America, and what happened is we took kind of a network approach, if you will. Cities around the nation had Startup America partnerships. So you had Startup Nashville, you had Startup Illinois, and they created kind of a network. And it would be a place, let's say, like 1776 where we are, where basically they could learn pitch competitions, they could network with each other, they could talk about their business model and what was working. They brought mentors in, a very, very important part of it. And then we brought corporate partners in who made either outright sort of things available to the startups or great deals for startups where they could purchase things at a discount. So we did that, but meanwhile, we were watching this organization called Startup Weekend that was growing, and they were doing really cool and similar things. They were creating these startup weekends where entrepreneurs coming together with an idea could come together and kind of pitch each other and work off of each other and create teams to see if some of these models made sense and take it forward. And then Startup Weekend also sort of worked with them along life's path. So to refine the business model, there was some training, et cetera. So we merged with them and created created this organization called Up Global. And for those that want to check it out, and I encourage you to, it's up.co, up.co. And you'll see there's all kinds of stuff. You can get access to mentors. You can find a local place to go. You can go to a startup weekend, register for one of them. Lots and lots of resources. And then just recently, I think it was the summit last week, they announced these Up Global ambassadors, and in 600 cities around the nation, people who've had experience building startups will serve as mentors to startups who need a mentor.
Awesome. Just letting you know, this month we had, I think, 100 events, a little bit more than Startup Weekend this month.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I mean, this culture is happening. Like, the train has left the station, and it's very, very exciting to see. And, my husband just returned from a tour of 5 cities where he took a bus from city to city. It's called The Rise of the Rest. And the reason for it is he goes to cities that are not in any way intuitive as great startup hubs. We're trying to prove the point that there's unbelievable, innovative new companies starting and bringing innovation between the coasts. We all know New York, we know Washington here, we know San Francisco, and sometimes people wouldn't put Washington in the same category as New York and San Francisco. But, he's been to Pittsburgh, he's been to Detroit, he's been to Madison, Wisconsin, he's been to St. Louis, Missouri, et cetera. And we go out to these places to basically shine a light and make it clear that all across America, startups are doing unbelievable things, and not just in tech, but in all kinds of cool things. So we're excited.
I got probably 2 more questions before we open to the Q&A.
Good.
Most admired CEO.
Well,
What's
sort
the
of
secret?
runner-up for most admired CEO, truth be told. The Red Cross CEO actually won but there was a slate of finalists that I was privileged to be a part of.
But we would love to know what your secrets, to becoming the most admired CEO, second runner-up, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But what's sort of the trade secrets you
Bridesmaid.
give? Yeah, exactly.
No.
Bridesmaid.
I would say there's 2 things. And I think, if we had the winner here or anybody that was nominated, they would probably say the same thing. Put a really great team around you, and you will become a most admired CEO. Leadership is sort of made a lot easier when you have great people. And by great people who challenge you, right? I think the mistake, and particularly for young entrepreneurs, the mistake that's often made is to hire someone who's a little behind you, maybe a little younger, maybe someone who doesn't intimidate you. But I actually think the smartest CEOs and the smartest leaders surround themselves with people that they might actually think are better than they are, or teach them things every day. So my team, I grow smarter every time I spend time with my team, because they add so much value. They bring experiences or a perspective that I just can't have, but we're much, much better together. And then I would add to that having somebody who has more experience than you or has done something that you haven't done before. And I want to particularly speak to people with new organizations. When life is really busy, it's hard to find time for this. But often when you're starting a new company or a new entity, you don't have time to put someone on the radar screen and make time for them who's been there and done that. But from where I sit, and I've seen a lot of organizations, both on the nonprofit and the for-profit side, the ones that break out are the ones that are smart enough to understand they need somebody whispering in their ear and helping to guide them who's been there and done that. So I'm all about young teams, and I've talked a lot about that, but I'm also about having someone in your life that can kind of help course correct because they've been there and they've done that.
Okay. Actually, 2 more questions. So, you have this great team built around you. So what is sort of the future of the Case Foundation? Where do you see the Case Foundation in 100 years?
Well, I'm not sure there's going to be a Case Foundation in 100 years. My husband and I have been pretty clear from the beginning that we intend to, long before the Giving Pledge, we intend to give away most of our wealth in our lifetime, and what isn't given away in our lifetime, won't live long after we do. So we never saw the Case Foundation as a foundation in perpetuity, like say the Ford Foundation or some of the 100-year-old foundations that are big. And even Bill and Melinda at the Gates Foundation have put a timestamp on how long that foundation can live when they're no longer surviving. So I think in a lot of ways, a new generation of donors aren't necessarily into the perpetuity play, and we would definitely fall into that category.
Okay, so now this is a great segue to my last question, which was the Giving Pledge.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is started by Bill Gates,
And Melinda.
and Melinda,
And Warren.
Melinda and Warren.
Yeah.
And
A
I
team
saw
of
your
three.
I saw your interview with Charlie Rose. That the whole the whole room of
Right.
very like amazing people. So you and Melinda Gates have been sort of friends.
We have.
And
It didn't start that way.
yeah, it didn't start that way, but like that. So I wanted to ask, like, when you had the giving pledge. I mean, she called you up,
Yeah,
right?
she did.
So can you tell us like how that conversation went? Yeah.
Well, to put this into context, and I don't know if everyone knows what the Giving Pledge is, but it's an organization that Melinda Gates, Bill Gates, and Warren Buffett started basically to approach people with significant wealth and say, will you give at least half of your wealth away? And so, yes, Melinda called, but there's an interesting backstory, really, and that is that in our years of building AOL, we were fierce competitors with Microsoft. Microsoft was trying to put us out of business, and we were really trying to run over any interest they had in this space as well. I mean, if you're building an organization, that's just the reality, is that you have sort of a nemesis. But ours probably went even a little further because there was a large, high-profile federal court case where we took on Microsoft. So, Brian, I think when you first asked me about it, you said, oh, you and Melinda are friends. We're great friends. I think Melinda's an awesome human being, and I think that really of all three of them, but it wasn't always that way. We really were fierce competitors. But and I think you had used the analogy of athletes. On the field of play, you can be fierce competitors, but then you get off and you find, common bonds. And I think for us, after we left sort of the day-to-day of AOL, look, we have tremendous respect for Bill and Melinda and what they've built and the world that they're leaving really in a better place because they're here. So it was a no-brainer to say yes.
I mean, so you had a conversation with Melinda. What's more interesting is, how did you broach the topic to Steve about the pledge?
It wasn't hard because we had actually been on record as saying we intended to give most of our wealth away. Our children knew that long before the Giving Pledge came along. So sort of that decision had been made long before. I think what was uncomfortable for us was, well, why do we need to be so public about this? Like, why does it matter anyway? Why does anyone care? And does it seem in any way like it's about us if we say we're going to do this? But ultimately, how we made the decision, and I think this is where Steve came down too as we talked about it, was, it was an opportunity. We can learn so much from each other. I mean, networking, if you're trying to build an organization, it's so awesome that you're here tonight because it means you're a networker. And we can learn so much from others. And I think that was our sense in the Giving Pledges. This is really hard to find impact when you're trying to change the world, when you really attack almost anything. And so if you can get a little smarter by listening to the hopefully, successes and failures of others, that's a good thing. And I think we saw that network opportunity with the Giving Pledge, and we jumped.
I think we're going to open up the floor to Q&A. I'll have two more questions to ask you after we're done with Q&A. So,
all right.
First of all, who is a City Pass member? Raise your hand if you have a question. Don't be shy. You have a question? No? Okay. Last chance. All right. So, who have a question? Raise your hand. All right. No questions.
Right
okay.
here.
What's your question?
So I have 1 foot in startup and 1 foot in federal government.
Okay, that's great.
So I kind of live in both worlds.
Yeah.
And, I hear a lot sort of the focus on millennials and the focus on the private sector infusing innovation. And my experience has been that there are a lot of very spirited innovators in government and in nonprofits, and that there are a lot of very spirited innovators who are older than the millennials.
That's right.
And so I guess my question is, it seems like by focusing on the younger ones, you sort of leave out the older ones, and you leave out the ones who are sort of in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Sure. Well, first of all, I probably would be in the category of an older one, but I believe I'm an innovator. Our work with the public sector has been really important. I talked before about the Case Foundation being cross-sector, and that means we work with nonprofit, private sector, and government. we hosted together with the White House, we had the privilege of co-hosting a summit on innovation. And what we did was we brought 35 federal agencies together, and we did training on what we call prizes and challenges. Prizes and challenges, grand challenges, have been used for a couple hundred years to find great thinkers, great innovative. It's almost what you think of as the wisdom of the crowds, right, where you invite folks to come in. So the president wrote a presidential order sort of compelling the federal agencies to try prizes and challenges. We brought them together to train them. They were all ages from all kinds of agencies, et cetera, and we were blown away by the innovative spirit that they brought. But then what they did was they went back to their agencies and they said, okay, how can we tap the wisdom out across America? Prizes and challenges starts with the idea that maybe the smartest person in the world isn't in the room with you, okay? So how do we find him or her out there, and how do we engage them in what we try to do? 2 years later, we came back and we did a report out, and it is truly remarkable what happened because of this prizes and challenges. But more importantly, what it did was it allowed all those innovators in government, because I think there is an unfair bias that says government isn't innovative. There are a lot of innovators in government, and it sort of allowed them to bubble up and take a lead in some of this work, and we were really excited to see it. So we are about millennials, but by no means do we ever, we're about all ages, really trying to lock arms as a society with everyone on board.
Okay, next question from Jennifer from Springboard Enterprises.
All right, Jennifer.
So I'll start. My organization runs accelerator programs for women entrepreneurs. So I was particularly interested in your impact investing comments. And when we think of impact investing, one of the things we think about is investing in women entrepreneurs and the opportunity to kind of change society, not just through investing in social entrepreneurship, but through other avenues. So I was curious, other than investing in B Corps and having a designated fund for that, what are some other models that you've seen that are successful for impact investing other than investing in social ventures?
Other than investing in?
Social ventures like B Corps.
Okay, so we talked about up.co, and they have just launched a women's entrepreneurship program. So if that's an area or a segment you're particularly interested in, take a look at it. And as you know, we need many, many women in venture coming forward. But our work in impact investing has really ranged. It hasn't only been investing in B Corps. It's invested in companies that we think are doing interesting impact things. There's about 1,000 B Corps, but there's actually 10,000 companies using the B Corp tools to measure their own sort of social indicators, if you will. And so one of the things we're going to announce later this year is a partnership with B Corp, hopefully, that will enlarge who works with the B Corps. But our own investing has ranged from loan guarantees to equity investments to, just the whole range. And it hasn't stopped with B Corps. As I said, it's been for straight up startups too.
All right, next question. I think we have time for 2 more.
Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Will Gorham with a Vector Scholar in Loudoun County, Virginia. I wanted to know, what is the best way for a new nonprofit to present its idea to the foundation for consideration for a grant?
Okay, so the Case Foundation, we don't accept unsolicited grant proposals, but what we do try to do is put a lot of tools on the site that you can use to figure out who should you target and who should you be talking to. The way that we do strategic work at the Case Foundation is we do business planning every year. We proactively choose both the areas and the organizations we're going to invest in, and it's always a collaborative and it's always cross-sector, including government, nonprofit, and private sector. So while we don't grant, there are a lot of great organizations in DC who do accept grant proposals, but that's not the way we practice our philanthropy.
Okay, next question.
Hi, my name is Olivier Command. I'm actually with the Halcyon Incubator.
Oh, yay.
And we have a team of great entrepreneurs who are working on a range of issues from healthcare to education. And I was wondering, you mentioned actually in response to one of these questions, things that partners in nonprofits and NGOs, or excuse me, nonprofits and government can do to support the work of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I was wondering specifically, what do you think that the federal government should be investing in, broadly speaking, so that we can take advantage of the entrepreneurs, not just in, or the capacity of entrepreneurs, not just in places like DC and New York, but across the country?
Right. So in the last year, I've had the privilege of serving on the G8 last year, targeted impact investing as an area of focus where they wanted to see the countries in the G8 make progress. And each country they named an advisory board. So I was named to the US Advisory Board on Impact Investing. And in that role, we had to produce a document that made policy recommendations around what the government should be doing. You can actually find this on the Case Foundation site if you want to take a look at it. You can search under US Advisory Board or NAB, and you can get the report. But there were a variety of things, even simple things like IRS clarifying language for investors. For foundations, they're a little afraid of this space because they're worried that they're going to lose their IRS status. So getting Treasury engaged. The SBA has expanded some of the work that they're doing in impact investing. But one of the really exciting things that happened, we launched the report at the White House in June. And on that same day, we announced $2 billion in new impact investing commitments, of which we were $50 million of a new commitment to impact investments. So, we think there's lots of things the government can do. It's a fairly lengthy and thoughtful report. It was a team that put it together. And then what happened is all the countries of the G8 got together, and we wrote one Uber report as well to talk about what governments can do.
Okay, I want to get one more question from a woman. That's definitely Lily? Okay.
Hi, my name's Lily Beth Yangas, and I work with Booz Allen. We actually have a partnership here with 1776 on helping startups scale.
Great.
About 2 weeks ago, we actually co-sponsored the first Startup Weekend Women's Edition.
Oh,
And
great, yeah.
Yeah, it was an excellent time that we had. But as a large corporation, we're always looking on how to measure success, and we're looking for metrics. What are some of the key impact metrics that you specifically tell new investors to focus on, especially the ones that are not familiar with the impact investing or social enterprises in general?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, there isn't one answer to that, right? I talked before about sort of this MOU approach that we use, because really every investment has a different picture of what return on investment is. But for instance, with Startup Weekend, if somebody sponsored the Startup Weekend for women, I would think a no-brainer metric would be, where are we in terms of women-owned or women-led ventures a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and hopefully that conversation took place before you had the gathering so that you knew the goal that you were charging towards. And I just think, again, in business, there are disciplines all around us. There are things like stock prices and regulatory agencies that provide almost these guardrails to tell us how we're doing. But often, with startups or with nonprofits, those don't exist yet to measure your effectiveness. So having the conversation around what impact are you driving towards, and being tireless and persevering and just every day dogged about where are we against the goals that we set, either for ourselves or together with our investors.
Okay, two last questions. Last question is, if we can rewind back 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and you were sitting in front of a badass founder,
Yeah.
what sort of advice you would have given yourself? What's the single most important piece of advice you would have given yourself?
Yeah, I think probably not to get so wigged out over things that don't go the way that you plan. I mean, obviously, as you move through life, the mistakes you made, you look back on and you go, thank God for those. In most cases in business, because you can see how those were stepping stones to where you sit today. In the moment, you can never see that, but with perspective, you can. And I just, I think I was really tough on myself anytime I came up and didn't sort of meet a challenge or things didn't work out the way I wanted. But looking back, I can see, if you can tell yourself in that moment, I know I can't see it now, but this is going to turn into something good down the road, it just can be energizing to keep you on the road and not let you grow so discouraged that you walk away.
And the most important last question we always ask our guests.
Is this a drum roll?
Drum roll, please, yes. So, who's your favorite superhero or historical figure, and why?
That's not a hard one for me. Our startup president, George Washington. My husband likes to say, 200 and some years ago, America was just a startup, and it was. And we had the great benefit of having a terrific founder and sort of CEO. And it's really important if you look at the life of George Washington. Many people never wanted him to leave office. They begged him to please stay in the presidency. And he said, no, to prove this model and to be true to the mission that we all came together around and that I helped lead and make a reality, I have to step down. And I'm pretty convinced if he hadn't done that, we wouldn't be the nation that we are today. So, we love startups, we love founders, so of course, it's George Washington.
So obviously you told me this answer, and what I usually do is I'll try to find a gift for our speaker, something meaningful. And when I was looking on the internet, on eBay, I saw this poster, and I was like, this is it. This has got to be the poster. So what's the chances of having this is a poster that they sell in the wild, by the way, okay?
All right, okay.
So what's the chances of having a poster that has your favorite historic figure?
All right.
Wait, hold on. Chances of that, and also having the name of Steve's fund.
Oh, wow! Startup grind. I think you might have created that,
Thank you.
Brian.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gene Case, thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gene's
That's
case.
awesome.
There we go.
Let me take that. That's great. Love it. This will go in my office.